Hello, my dear adventurers. Your lawkeeper welcomes you back to our cozy sanctuary music, where whispers of the past echo through the ages. Tonight we embark on an extraordinary journey, a saga spanning 8,000 years, filled with legends, honor, and the relentless grip of winter. Our destination, the ancient stronghold of Winterfell in the heart of the North. We shall delve into the comprehensive history of House Stark, the Kings of Winter, the Wardens of the North, and arguably the most enduring noble house in all of Westeros, music. Imagine, if you will, the vast frozen wilderness that is the North. Picture endless forests of sentinel trees, their branches laden with snow, sculpted by the biting winds. Music. Envision rugged mountains where the wind howls like a chorus of ancient spirits, a mournful symphony echoing through the peaks. Frozen rivers snake through valleys untouched by the warmth of the south, their icy surfaces reflecting the pale northern sky. Music. Feel the sting of winter air against your skin, the satisfying crunch of snow beneath your boots. Inhale the sharp, clean scent of pine and frost, a fragrance unique to this unforgiving land. Music. Here, where summer snows are not uncommon and winter can last a generation, stands Winterfell, an ancient fortress, its foundations laid in the very dawn of history. Music. Its gray stone walls have witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, the relentless march of armies, and the quiet determination of a family whose words resonate through the centuries. Winter is coming, a warning and a promise intertwined. Music. So settle into your most comfortable spot. Wrap yourself in warmth, perhaps with a fur blanket and a cup of hot spiced wine, and let us begin at the very beginning, in an age when the world was young and heroes walked the earth. Music. Our story begins more than 8,000 years before the present day in a time known as the Age of Heroes. The first men had finally reached a fragile peace with the children of the forest after centuries of bloody conflict. The world was still raw and new, teeming with magic and wonder. Giants roamed the land, and greensight was more common than it is now. Wargs walked among men, and ancient powers pulsed beneath the surface, powers that have since faded from memory. In this primordial age, a figure emerged whose legacy would echo through millennia: Brandon Stark, known to history as Brandon the Builder, or simply Bran the Builder. The legends surrounding this ancient Brandon are so numerous and grand that many meisters believe they cannot possibly all be true. Some suggest that perhaps multiple men named Brandon, or even several generations of Brandons, had their deeds conflated into a single mythological figure. And yet the tales persist with remarkable consistency across thousands of years. Brandon the Builder was said to have been one of the first men who fought in the greatest conflict the world had ever known, the war against the Others, those terrible creatures of ice and death who descended from the lands of always winter to plunge the world into an endless night. This conflict, remembered in song and story as the Long Night, was a time of unspeakable horror. The sun hid its face for a generation, or so the stories say. Darkness blanketed the land, and from that darkness came the Others, riding their dead horses, leading an army of the risen dead. They swept across the north like a tide of frozen death, their eyes blazing as ice, their touch bringing the cold of the grave. Heroes rose to fight them, wielding blades of dragon glass and any weapon that might harm creatures already dead. The children of the forest joined forces with the first men in this desperate struggle, old enmities forgotten in the face of extinction. It is said that the Greenseers used their magic to weaken the Others and create weapons to fight them. According to the ancient tales, it was Brandon the Builder who led the combined forces of men and children in the final battles of this terrible war. Some stories claim he was a great warrior who slew others with a blade of dragon glass, his strikes swift and deadly, fueled by righteous fury. Other tales suggest he was a wise leader who united the scattered tribes of the first men and convinced the children to share their magic and knowledge, a diplomat as skilled as he was brave. The truth, if it can be separated from legend at all, likely contains elements of both. What we know with more certainty is what came after the Others were finally driven back into the frozen wastes from whence they came. In the aftermath of the Long Night, Brandon the Builder oversaw the construction of the most ambitious project ever attempted in Westeros, the Wall. This massive structure, 300 miles long and 700 feet high in places, was built from ice and stone, and, if the legends are true, infused with ancient magic by the children of the forest. Some say giants helped in its construction, using their immense strength to move stones no man could lift, their booming voices echoing across the frozen landscape. Others claim that the wall is held together not just by ice and mortar, but by spells woven into its very foundation, wards that would keep the others from ever crossing south again. Brandon the Builder raised this monument to survival, this barrier between the world of men and the realm of eternal winter. In doing so, he gave humanity a chance to rebuild, to thrive, to endure. But the wall was not Brandon's only achievement. He also founded the Night's Watch, that ancient brotherhood sworn to guard the realms of men from whatever might come from beyond the wall. He granted them the land south of the wall, a gift known to history as Brandon's gift, to sustain them in their eternal vigil. The land was fertile and rich in resources, allowing the Watch to become self-sufficient. And in a location whose significance would only grow with the passage of centuries, Brandon the Builder raised a great castle and fortress, Winterfell. The very name evokes the victory over winter, the place where winter fell, where the darkness was pushed back, and the light of humanity endured. Built with the help of giants, or so the old tales claim, Winterfell rose from the northern earth as a symbol of strength and permanence. Its walls were thick and strong, its towers tall, its godswood ancient and sacred. Beneath the castle, Brandon excavated vast crypts where the dead could rest, surrounded by darkness and stone, watched over by stone effigies and their rusted iron swords. These crypts would eventually stretch deep into the earth, level upon level, descending into shadow, housing generation after generation of Stark dead. From this fortress, from this seat of power carved from stone and determination, Brandon the Builder established House Stark. The direwolf became their sigil, that great beast of the north, fierce and loyal, running gray against a field of white. Their words, simple and stark like the men who spoke them, were not a boast of power or a claim to greatness, but a warning, a reminder of reality. Winter is coming. And so House Stark was born, not in conquest or ambition, but in survival and duty, in the grim determination to endure whatever darkness might come. The early Starks ruled from Winterfell, but they were not yet the undisputed masters of the North. The lands that would eventually bow to the kings of winter were in those early days divided among many petty kingdoms, each with its own kings and lords, each jealous of their independence and power. The Barrow kings ruled from their great burial mounds in what would become the Barrowlands, their power derived from their ancestors and their mastery of the land. The Red Kings of House Bolton held sway from their fortress of the Dread Fort, a place already gaining a dark reputation for the cruelties practiced within its walls, where screams echoed through the night. The Marsh Kings ruled the swamps and wetlands of the Neck, their people as elusive and resilient as the reeds that surrounded them. The War King commanded Sea Dragon Point with an army that included not just men but beasts under the control of skin changers, a fearsome force to behold. The Kings of Winter were but one power among many, rulers of Winterfell and its immediate surroundings, but nothing more. Yet from these humble beginnings would grow an empire, and the descendants of Brandon the Builder would not rest until all the North knelt before the direwolf throne of Winterfell. The transformation of House Stark from minor kings to masters of the entire North took thousands of years and was written in blood and marriage, in conquest and alliance, in unwavering determination. The early kings of winter were not the honorable lords we might imagine from later ages. They were warriors and conquerors, fierce and often cruel, willing to do whatever was necessary to expand their power and bring the fractious North under their control. They understood that only a united North could withstand the threats from beyond the Wall and the ambitions of the South. The first great enemies of House Stark were the Barrow Kings, that ancient dynasty that ruled the Barrowlands and styled themselves Kings of the First Men. The conflict between Winterfell and the Barrowlands would last so long that singers called it the Thousand Years' War, though runic evidence suggests it was actually a series of wars spanning perhaps 2 centuries. The Barrow Kings were proud and powerful, ruling from their great earthen mounds where their dead lay in splendor, surrounded by treasures and guarded by ancient spirits. They commanded the loyalty of many lesser lords and held vast territories south of Winterfell. The wars between the Starks and the Barrow Kings were brutal affairs, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage for generations. Armies marched across the Barrowlands, burning and pillaging, the clash of steel and the roar of battle echoing across the landscape. The Starks would win victories, pushing south only to be pushed back in the next generation. The Barrow Kings would raid north, burning steadings and villages, only to retreat when winter came and made campaigning impossible. This went on year after year, decade after decade, century after century, until finally, in a conflict whose details have been lost to time, the last Barrow King was defeated. The end came not with total destruction, but with submission and alliance. The Barrow King bent the knee, acknowledging the superiority of the Kings of Winter, and to cement this new peace, he gave his daughter's hand in marriage to the Stark King. The wedding was a grand affair, a symbol of unity and the end of a long and bloody conflict. Through this union of blood, the Barrowlands were brought under Winterfell's dominion, and the first great step in unifying the North was complete. The Barrow Kings became vassals, and over time their line would dwindle and fade, their power absorbed into the growing might of House Stark. But if the Barrow Kings represented the Starks' longest conflict, House Bolton represented their most dangerous enemy. From their castle of the Dreadfor on the eastern reaches of the north, the Red Kings of House Bolton carved out their own kingdom of fear and blood. The Boltons were known even then for their practice of flaying their enemies, a tradition so horrifying that when the Starks finally defeated them, one of the first edicts was to outlaw this barbaric custom. Even outlawed, the Boltons would continue their dark practices in secret, and the enmity between the direwolf and the flayed man would never truly die. The very air around the Dreadfort seemed to thrum with a palpable sense of dread. The wars between Stark and Bolton raged for centuries. Each house won victories and suffered defeats. The Red Kings proved to be cunning and ruthless opponents, willing to use treachery and terror to achieve their ends. Their spies were everywhere, their assassins skilled and merciless. Stories tell of Bolton kings who would wear the skins of their enemies, including Stark kings, as cloaks, a practice so vile it lives in infamy even in distant ages. The flayed skin served as a gruesome trophy, a symbol of their power and cruelty. One tale speaks of a siege of the Dreadfor that lasted 2 years until a king of winter named Harlan Stark starved out the Boltons and forced their submission. The stench of death permeated the castle as the Boltons were reduced to eating rats and even their own dead. Eventually, through a combination of military superiority and perhaps exhaustion on both sides, the Red Kings were brought to heel. They bent the knee and became vassals of Winterfell, but they never forgot their former royal status. The Boltons would remain one of the most powerful houses in the North, always dangerous, always watched, their loyalty never entirely trusted. The prohibition against flaying would be one of the most visible signs of Stark dominance, though whispers would persist through the ages that in the dark dungeons of the Dreadfor, the old ways continued in secret. Beyond the Barrow Kings and the Red Kings, the Starks faced and defeated a score of other petty kingdoms. The War King of Sea Dragon Point commanded an army of beasts and skin changers, men who could slip into the minds of wolves and eagles and other creatures. According to documents preserved at the Night Fort, a king of winter killed the War King along with his sons, his beasts, and his greenseers, and took the War King's daughters as prizes, perhaps to gain their magical bloodlines for House Stark. This dark tale, if true, might explain the gift for warring that would occasionally appear in the Stark line over the following millennia. The Marsh Kings ruled the swamps and bogs of the Neck until King Rickard Stark defeated them in battle and then sealed the conquest by marrying the Marsh King's daughter. The wedding was held in the heart of the swamp, surrounded by the eerie glow of the fireflies and the croaking of frogs. Through this marriage, the Neck was brought under Winterfell's authority, and the Marsh King's vassals, including House Reed, became sworn to the Starks. The Reeds would prove to be among the most loyal of all northern houses, maintaining their allegiance through every subsequent age. One by one, the petty kingdoms fell. House Greenwood, House Towers, House Amber, House Frost, and a score of lesser houses whose very names have been lost to history were all defeated, absorbed, or destroyed. Some were conquered by force of arms, their castles burned to the ground, their lands seized by the Starks. Others were brought into the fold through marriage alliances, their daughters becoming Stark queens, their sons serving as Stark bannermen. Still others simply faded away, their lines dying out or their power waning until they had no choice but to seek protection from the Kings of Winter. By the time the Andals began their invasion of Westeros thousands of years later, The North had been unified under the rule of House Stark. During this long age of consolidation, several kings of winter earned particular renown. King John Stark drove raiders from the White Knife River and built the Wolf's Den at its mouth as a fortress to protect the eastern coast. The fortress stood as a beacon of defiance against those who sought to plunder the north. The stronghold would often be granted to younger sons or grandsons of the king in the north, and one such cadet branch, the Greystarks, would rule it for many years before being extinguished after they foolishly allied with the Boltons against the main Stark line. Their betrayal would be remembered as a stain on the Stark name. King Theon Stark, who would be remembered as a fierce and capable war leader, made common cause with House Bolton to defeat an Andal invasion at the Battle of the Weeping Water. The battle was a bloody and decisive victory for the North, halting the Andal advance and preserving the North's unique culture. After this victory, Theon did something extraordinary. He built a fleet, sailed across the narrow sea to Andals itself, the homeland of the Andals, and took revenge by sacking their settlements and putting hundreds to death. The screams of the Andals echoed across the sea, a testament to the fury of the North. He also conquered the Three Sisters, those rocky islands in the Bight, attacked the Fingers, and fought against the Ironborn raiders who constantly plagued the North's western coast. Theon drove them from Cape Kraken and Bear Island, slaying Ravos in the process, and thereby earned himself a place in northern song and legend. The conquest of Bear Island would lead to one of the more colorful tales in Stark history. King Roderick Stark won the island from the Ironborn, not through battle, but through a wrestling match, or so the story goes. After defeating the Ironborn champion, Roderick granted Bear Island to House Mormont, establishing them as one of his vassals. The Mormonts would prove to be fierce and loyal bannermen, the women of their house becoming particularly renowned as warriors, equally capable with sword and spear as any man. Throughout these centuries of warfare and consolidation, the Kings of Winter maintained a close relationship with the Night's Watch and the Wall. Many younger sons and brothers of the Stark Kings joined the Watch, and several of the youngest men ever to serve as Lord Commander were members of House Stark. The Watch was not yet seen as a dumping ground for criminals and broken men, but as an honorable calling, and the Starks ensured that the Watch was supplied and supported. This tradition of support would continue through every age of Stark rule, yet not all the stories from this era are tales of warfare and conquest. One of the most famous legends concerns a king in the north named Brandon Stark and a wildling raider called Bale the Bard. According to the tale, Bale came south of the Wall and infiltrated Winterfell disguised as a traveling bard. His songs were beautiful and haunting, captivating the court. When Lord Brandon insulted him, calling him a coward, Bale took his revenge by abducting Brandon's only daughter during the night. The Starks searched everywhere for the girl, never finding her until one day she returned to Winterfell carrying a baby boy. The child was Bale's son, but he was also Brandon's only heir. And when Brandon died, this boy became the next Lord of Winterfell. Years later, when Bale led a wildling army south and the new Lord Stark rode out to face him, he found himself fighting his own father. The story ends with the Lord killing Bale in battle and then, overcome with grief at what he had done, taking his own life. The tragedy would haunt House Stark for generations. Whether this tale is true or mere legend, it illustrates an important truth about House Stark. Their survival often hung by a thread. Unlike southern houses that might have many branches and cadet lines, the Starks put all their hopes on the direct line of succession from father to son. When that line was threatened, when heirs were scarce, the very future of the house was in jeopardy. This would prove to be both a source of strength, keeping the family united and the line of succession clear, and a vulnerability that enemies might exploit. As the centuries turned into millennia, the Kings of Winter became legendary figures, not just in the north, but throughout Westeros. They had succeeded in maintaining their independence and their ancient customs even as the Andal invasion swept through the southern kingdoms, replacing the First Men dynasties with new rulers who worshiped the Seven instead of the old gods. The North one of the most disturbing legends concerns a Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, known only as the Night's King. According to the stories told by Old Nan and other storytellers in the north, this Night's King was once a Stark of Winterfell, a younger brother to the King of Winter whose name was Brandon. He rose to become the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and during a ranging beyond the wall, he saw a woman with skin as white as the moon and eyes like blue stars. Some say she was one of the others, or perhaps something else equally terrible and beautiful. The Night's King fell in love with this creature, and when he brought her back to the Night Fort, the largest castle along the wall, he declared himself king and her his queen. For 13 years, the Night's King ruled from the Night Fort with his corpse queen at his side, performing dark rituals and making sacrifices to the others. The watch was corrupted and used for dark purposes. The Night's Watch, sworn to protect the realms of men, became instead a force of terror under his command. It was only when Brandon the Breaker, a king of winter, joined forces with Joramun, the king beyond the wall, that the Night's King was finally defeated and cast down. After his defeat, his very name was forbidden to be spoken, stricken from the records so that his evil would not be remembered or honored. This tale, if it has any truth to it at all, suggests that House Stark's connection to the others and to the darkness beyond the wall goes deeper than simple enmity. Perhaps there is old magic in the Stark blood, magic that connects them to the ancient powers of ice and winter, magic that can be used for good or twisted to evil depending on the man who wields it. This theme of Starks being drawn to darkness, of having to resist the call of winter, would echo through their history in ways both subtle and profound. The later centuries of the Age of Kings saw other notable rulers from Winterfell. Brandon the Shipwright, dreaming of what lay across the Sunset Sea to the west, built a great fleet to explore those unknown waters. He sailed west with his ships and was never seen again, vanishing into the mystery of the Western Ocean. His disappearance was a great loss to the North and fueled many myths about the unknown lands beyond the sea. His son, also named Brandon, was so distraught by his father's disappearance that he became Brandon the Burner, and in his grief and rage he burned every ship in the northern harbors and shipyards. From that day forward, the North had no strength at sea, a weakness that would plague them when dealing with the Ironborn raiders in later ages. King Doran Stark reigned in an age when giants still walked the north and the children of the forest could still be found in the deepest woods. Stories claim that Doran's champion, a warrior named Redwyn, fought and slew giants, and that Doran himself traded with the children, maintaining the ancient friendship between men and the first inhabitants of Westeros. By his time, both giants and children were already fading, retreating into the wild places, but they had not yet vanished entirely from the world. Brandon the Ninth Stark earned fame by destroying the ships of the rebellious wildlings on Skagos, that mysterious island to the northeast where cannibals and unicorns were said to dwell. Skagosi had always been difficult to control, more wildling than Northmen in their ways, and Brandon's campaign to bring them back under Winterfell's authority would be remembered as particularly brutal. Throughout these centuries, the Kings of Winter waged endless wars against threats from all sides. The wildlings from beyond the wall raided constantly, forcing the kings to send men and supplies to reinforce the Night's Watch. The Ironborn from the Iron Islands launched their longships to raid the western coast. Carrying off plunder and thralls, the Kings of Winter responded with fire and sword, driving the Ironborn from their settlements on the mainland again and again. Yet the Starks could never truly strike at the Iron Islands themselves, a crippling limitation born from Brandon the Burner's act of fiery destruction, forever depriving them of a fleet. The crypts beneath Winterfell grew level after level, a silent city descending deep into the cold embrace of the earth. Each king upon their death was enshrined with a stone statue, seated eternally beside his tomb. An iron sword representing his strength and reign rested across his lap, while a direwolf, symbol of the North and the Starks' connection to it, lay faithfully at his feet. The oldest crypts, buried deepest, became realms of shadow and whispering fear. Even the bravest men hesitated to venture there, a palpable sense of the ancient dead clinging to the air. The ancient kings slumbered in darkness, their swords rusting away the memory of battles fought, their direwolves crumbling to dust, their names fading from memory like forgotten legends, yet their presence lingered, a weight felt by all who walked the halls above, the weight of responsibility, the weight of expectation, the weight of winter itself. Winter after winter came and went, each a brutal test. Some were short, lasting only a year or two, a brief respite before the true cold returned. Others were long and terrible, stretching on for a decade or more, decimating the weak, testing the strength of the strong, and forcing the Starks to their limits. Each time the Starks led their people through the darkness, rationing meager supplies with a grim determination, making agonizing decisions about who would live and who would not, and maintaining order when desperation threatened to plunge the North into chaos. It was in these trials, these seasons of unending hardship, that they truly earned their reputation as the Lords of Winter, the Masters of the North, the house that would endure no matter how hard the wind blew or how deep the snow fell. Their culture, forged in ice and hardship, became distinct from the rest of Westeros. While the South embraced the seven gods brought by the Andals, the North held fast to the old gods, the ancient spirits of the forest and stream. They prayed before heart trees in the gods' wood, ancient and silent, listening to the rustling leaves for answers to their unspoken prayers, seeking guidance from the very soul of the land. While southern knights fought for fleeting glory and donned elaborate, gleaming armor, northern warriors fought with a practical, brutal efficiency. They wore furs and leather, garments that offered warmth and protection, wielding axes and hammers alongside their swords, weapons forged for survival, not show. While southern lords built bright, opulent castles and threw lavish feasts that flaunted their wealth, the northern lords fortified their holdings against the relentless winter and conserved their precious resources, knowing that lean times always came, as inevitable as the dawn. And through it all, through thousands of years of history etched in ice and blood, House Stark endured. Sons followed fathers, kings followed kings, the line unbroken, a testament to their resilience. The succession was sometimes contested, sometimes shrouded in uncertainty, but it never truly failed. There was always a Stark in Winterfell, a steadfast presence against the encroaching darkness. There was always a direwolf, whether in truth or spirit, on the throne of the kings of winter, a symbol of their enduring connection to the land. And there was always someone to speak those ancient words, a promise and a warning etched into the very soul of the North. Winter is coming. For 8,000 years, give or take the inaccuracies of ancient records, House Stark had ruled as kings in the North, bending knee to no one, masters of all between the wall and the neck. They had maintained their independence through the Age of Heroes, through the coming of the Andals, through every crisis and conflict that had swept across Westeros like a winter storm. They were one of the last bastions of the First Men's culture, a living link to a forgotten past. They were one of the last ancient dynasties to rule unbroken from time immemorial, their roots intertwined with the very soil of the North. And then came Aegon Targaryen and his dragons, a force unlike any Westeros had ever seen, and nothing would ever be the same again. In the year now known as 1 AC, Aegon the Conqueror landed on the eastern shore of Westeros with his two sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys, and three dragons, Balerion the Black Dread, Vhagar, and Meraxes. These were the last dragons in the world, survivors of the doom of Valyria, magnificent and terrifying creatures that dwarfed any beast Westeros had ever known. They were weapons of unparalleled power, capable of incinerating armies and melting stone itself. Aegon's ambition was simple and staggering. He would conquer all of Westeros, forging the Seven Kingdoms into one united realm under his rule. A singular vision born of fire and blood, the southern kingdoms fell one by one, their armies unable to withstand the dragon's fiery wrath. At the Field of Fire, Aegon and his sisters unleashed all three dragons against the combined armies of the Reach and the Westerlands, turning the battlefield into an inferno. 4,000 men burned alive, their screams echoing across the scorched earth. The mightiest host ever assembled in Westeros was utterly destroyed, their hopes reduced to ash. King Harren the Black, who had poured the wealth and lives of generations into building the massive castle of Harrenhal, believing its thick walls could withstand any assault, learned a brutal and final lesson. Stone walls meant nothing when Balerion's fire could melt rock itself. House Hoare, the Iron Kings, were extinguished in a single night. House Gardner, the ancient kings of the Reach, were annihilated entirely when King Mern and all his heirs perished in the flames at the Field of Fire, their lineage ending in screams and smoke. The other kingdoms, witnessing the horrifying consequences of resistance, chose submission instead, their banners lowered in reluctant surrender. In the north, Torrhen Stark, king in the north, called his banners, the drums of war echoing across the frozen landscape. The distance was vast, and it took time for the word to spread, for the lords to gather their men, for the great host of the north to assemble. By the time Torhan led his army of 30,000 southward, crossing the neck and entering the Riverlands, Aegon had already conquered most of the south, his victory seemingly inevitable. But Torrhen marched on regardless, his face grim, determined to meet this conqueror and decide the fate of his kingdom, for good or ill. The two armies met at the Trident, that great river that flowed through the heart of the Riverlands, its waters stained red from countless battles past. On the southern bank waited Aegon, his silver hair gleaming in the sun, with an army some 45,000 strong, a diverse force composed of men from all the kingdoms he had already conquered. Riverlanders, Stormlanders, Reachmen, and Westermen stood shoulder to shoulder, united under the banner of the dragon. Circling overhead like death incarnate were the three dragons, their shadows falling upon the battlefield, a constant reminder of the power that Aegon wielded. On the northern bank stood Torhen, his face etched with years of harsh winters and hard decisions, and his 30,000 Northmen, the greatest army the North had fielded in generations. They were a grim and determined force, clad in furs and leathers, their eyes reflecting the cold fire of the North. They knew what they faced, and they stood ready to meet their fate. Torrhen Stark was no fool. His scouts had seen the ruins of Harrenhal, where the stone itself had melted like wax, a testament to the dragon's terrible power. Word had reached him of the field of fire, where men had burned in their armor, where the heat had been so intense that swords and spears melted into slag. He knew what his men faced if he ordered them to cross the river and give battle, a fiery death that awaited them on the other side. That night, under a sky full of cold, indifferent stars, King Torrhen called a council of all his lords and advisors, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of the campfires. Some wanted to fight, trusting in northern valor and the courage of their men to somehow triumph over dragons, an impossible hope fueled by pride and desperation. These were the hot-blooded ones, the proud ones, who would rather die fighting than bend the knee to a foreign invader. Others suggested withdrawing to Moat Cailin, that ancient fortress at the southern edge of the neck, where the treacherous terrain would negate the advantage of dragons, and where the Starks could make a stand that Aegon would find impossible to overcome. This had a certain wisdom to it, a pragmatic approach to a seemingly unwinnable situation. The causeway through the neck was narrow and treacherous, and Moat Cailin had never fallen to a southern army, a testament to its formidable defenses. Torrhen's bastard half-brother, Brandon Snow, a man known for his daring and recklessness, offered the most desperate and daring plan of all. He volunteered to cross the Trident in darkness, sneak into Aegon's camp, and assassinate the dragons as they slept, or at least their riders. If he could kill Aegon and his sisters, the dragons might be rendered useless or at least leaderless, and the Northern army could triumph in the chaos that followed. It was a suicide mission, a desperate gamble with little chance of success, but Brandon was willing to attempt it if his brother commanded. Torrhen listened to all these counsels, weighing the options, the lives of his people hanging in the balance. He considered the cost of war, the inevitable death and destruction that would follow a battle against the dragons. He considered the future of the North, the survival of his house, the well-being of his people. He pondered long and hard, the weight of his crown heavy upon his brow, and finally he made his decision. The next morning, under a banner of parley, Torrhen sent Brandon Snow, accompanied by 3 Meisters bearing scrolls and assurances of good faith, to Aegon's camp. Messages were exchanged, terms were discussed, the fate of the North hanging in the balance with every word. And then, on the morning after, King Torrhen Stark, the last king in the North, crossed the Trident, his face grim, his steps heavy. He walked to where Aegon Targaryen waited, surrounded by his knights and lords, and knelt before the conqueror. He laid his ancient crown, the crown of the kings of winter that had been worn by his ancestors for thousands of years, at Aegon's feet. He swore fealty to Aegon as the king of the 7 kingdoms, acknowledging his rule over all of Westeros. And in return, Aegon, recognizing the strength and resilience of the North, named him Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, entrusting him with the governance of his ancestral lands. From that day forward, Torrhen Stark has been known by 2 names, Lord Torrhen to those who honor his decision, seeing it as a pragmatic choice that saved the North from destruction, and the King who knelt to those who question it, seeing it as a betrayal of his ancestors and a surrender of Northern independence. But there is one indisputable fact about Torrhen's choice, a truth that cannot be denied. No Northmen died on the Trident, no noble houses were extinguished in a blaze of dragon fire, no castles were burned to the ground, their stones melted into slag, no swords were melted down to forge Aegon's Iron Throne, that symbol of conquest and dominion. The North remained intact, its people alive, its lords in their keeps, its customs unchanged. Torrhen had chosen survival over pride, the lives of his men over his own glory, the future of his house over the crown he wore, was a decision that would be debated for generations to come, a source of both pride and shame in the long history of House Stark. Not everyone agreed with his choice. After Torrhen's surrender, a group of northern warriors refusing to bend the knee to the Targaryens formed a sellsword company called the Company of the Rose and went into exile across the Narrow Sea, vowing never to serve a dragon king. Torrhen's own son spoke of rebellion, of raising the Stark banner and declaring independence once more, fueled by youthful anger and a desire to avenge their lost kingdom. But Torrhen held firm, his resolve unshaken. He had made his choice, and he would stand by it no matter the cost. Eventually, his sons, seeing the wisdom in their father's choice or simply recognizing they had no alternative, accepted Targaryen rule, however grudgingly. To bind the realm together, to forge stronger ties between the North and the South, Queen Rhaenys Targaryen arranged a marriage between Torrhen's daughter and Rhaenyra Arryn, the young lord of the Eyrie, a union of ice and sky. This alliance was meant to help integrate the North into the new Seven Kingdoms, to create bonds of blood and marriage between regions that had been enemies for centuries. Torrhen agreed to the marriage, though letters preserved at the Citadel suggest he did so only after much protest, his reluctance a testament to his lingering resentment of the conquest. His sons, their pride wounded, refused to attend the wedding, a silent protest against the Targaryen yoke. As a reward for his submission and his service, Aegon relied upon Torrhen to help pacify the realm, recognizing his authority and influence in the north. When the sistermen of the Three Sisters rose in rebellion under Queen Marla Sunderland, challenging Aegon's rule, it was Torrhen who sent Sir Warwick Manderly with ships from White Harbor to crush the uprising, a swift and decisive action that reaffirmed the North's loyalty to the Iron Throne. When Aegon needed longships to invade the Iron Islands, to finally bring those rebellious isles to heel, it was Torrhen who provided them, sending warriors from Bear Island to fight alongside the Targaryen forces, proving his commitment to the new order. And so ended the age of the Kings of Winter, an era of independence and fierce self-reliance. The crown that had been worn for 8,000 years was given up without a battle, a surrender not of spirit, but of sovereignty. The independence that had been maintained against all threats and all enemies was surrendered to preserve the people of the North, a sacrifice made for the greater good. House Stark remained powerful, perhaps even more powerful than before as Wardens of the North, their influence extending throughout the vast northern territories. But they were no longer kings, no longer sovereign rulers. They were subjects, vassals of the Iron Throne, bound by oath and honor to serve whoever sat upon that throne, whether they deserved that service or not. The 3 centuries of Targaryen rule over Westeros were for House Stark a time of consolidation and adjustment, a period of navigating the complexities of southern politics while maintaining their northern identity. They ruled the North as they always had, managing their bannermen, collecting taxes, dispensing justice, and preparing their people for the winters that came and went with relentless regularity. But now they also had obligations to the south, to the Iron Throne, to kings who sat in King's Landing rather than Winterfell. A distant and often indifferent presence was a delicate balance, maintaining northern independence in spirit while acknowledging southern sovereignty, a constant tightrope walk between tradition and obligation. In fact, the early Targaryen kings generally left the North to its own devices, recognizing the region's unique culture and the difficulty of imposing southern customs upon its fiercely independent people. As long as taxes were paid and levies were provided when needed, the lords of Winterfell were free to govern as they saw fit, their authority largely unchallenged. This arrangement suited both parties, a tacit agreement to respect each other's autonomy. The Targaryens had little interest in the frozen north with its ancient trees and old gods, a land so different from the sunny south. And the Starks had little interest in southern politics, a world of intrigue and backstabbing that seemed far removed from the harsh realities of northern life. The distance between King's Landing and Winterfell was vast and the journey difficult, especially in winter, a hazardous trek across treacherous terrain. Lords of Winterfell rarely traveled south unless summoned, their visits to the capital infrequent and often unwelcome. And Targaryen kings rarely traveled north unless some pressing matter demanded it, their preference being for the warmer climes of the south. There were exceptions, of course, moments when the two worlds collided, forging new bonds and reshaping old alliances. During the reign of Jaehaerys I, known as the Conciliator and one of the greatest Targaryen kings, he and his sister wife, Queen Alysanne, made a famous royal progress through the north, a historic event that left a lasting impression on the region and on the relationship between House Stark and House Targaryen. Lord Alaric Stark played host to the king and queen at Winterfell, showing them northern hospitality and the ancient customs of his people, revealing the heart of the north to the royal visitors. Queen Alysanne was particularly fascinated by the north and its mysteries, captivated by its stark beauty and the enduring strength of its people. She flew her dragon Silverwing to the wall to see that ancient barrier with her own eyes, to witness the awe-inspiring scale of that monumental defense. But something strange happened when she attempted to fly beyond the wall, a mysterious force pushing her back. 3 times she tried, and 3 times Silverwing refused to cross, turning back south despite Alysanne's commands, a primal fear gripping the magnificent beast. The queen later wrote to Jaehaerys about her unease, noting that even her dragon seemed to fear whatever lay beyond that icy barrier, a chilling realization that sparked her curiosity and fueled her determination to understand the ancient threat. She also requested and received historical documents about the wall from the Night's Watch and Winterfell's archives, poring over ancient texts and forgotten legends, seeking to unravel the mysteries of the past and understand the purpose of the Great Wall. During this visit, Alysanne became a passionate advocate for the Night's Watch, recognizing the vital role they played in defending the realm from the unknown horrors that lurked beyond the wall. Her efforts led to additional lands being granted to the Order, a stretch of territory called the New Gift that doubled the lands available to support the Black Brothers, providing them with much-needed resources and bolstering their defenses. He also convinced Jaehaerys to fund the construction of a new road from Winterfell to the Wall, making communication and travel between the North and the Wall much easier, a vital improvement that strengthened the bond between the two regions. These actions earned the Targaryens great goodwill in the North, and the memory of good Queen Alysanne would remain warm for generations, a shining example of a southern ruler who cared for the North and its people. When the Targaryen civil war, known as the Dance of the Dragons, erupted during the reign of King Viserys V, House Stark was drawn into southern conflicts as never before, forced to choose sides in a bitter struggle for the Iron Throne. The succession was disputed between Viserys' daughter Rhaenyra and his son Aegon II, plunging the realm into chaos and bloodshed. Lord Cregan Stark, one of the most formidable lords of Winterfell in the Targaryen era, a warrior of renowned skill and unwavering loyalty, declared for Rhaenyra, honoring the oath his father had sworn to uphold her claim, a decision that would have far-reaching consequences for the North. Cregan led a great host of northern soldiers, called the Winterwolves because many were older men who sought glory in their final years, to fight for Rhaenyra's cause, their loyalty unwavering. By the time the Northmen reached the south, much of the conflict was already over, the war having taken a devastating toll on both sides. Both Rhaenyra and Aegon were dead, their dreams of power turned to ashes, but Cregan's arrival in King's Landing was still momentous, a sign that the North would not be ignored. He served briefly as Hand of the King, a position of great power and responsibility, and oversaw the trials and executions of many who had committed crimes during the war, dispensing justice with a stern hand. His time in the South was marked by rough justice and no-nonsense governance, very much in the Northern style, earning him a reputation for strength and honor before he returned home to Winterfell, leaving the South to its own devices. The participation in the Dance of the Dragons cost the North dearly in men and resources, a heavy price to pay for a Southern conflict. It reinforced the lesson that Southern conflicts brought only grief to those who became entangled in them, a painful reminder of the dangers of meddling in the affairs of the Iron Throne. The lords of Winterfell who followed would be more reluctant to involve the North in the intrigues of the South, understanding that what happened in King's Landing rarely benefited the people of the North. and often brought only bloodshed and sorrow. As the Targaryen dynasty continued, some lords of Winterfell maintained close relations with the Iron Throne, forging alliances and navigating the treacherous currents of courtly politics, while others kept their distance, focusing on the needs of the North and avoiding entanglement in southern affairs. All, however, maintained the traditions of the North, the worship of the old gods, the stark sense of honor and duty that defined House Stark, the enduring values that shaped their identity. They buried their dead in the crypts beneath Winterfell, erected statues even though they were no longer kings, honoring their ancestors and preserving their memory, and taught their children that winter was always coming and that they must always be prepared, instilling in them the values of resilience, self-reliance, unwavering vigilance. The words "winter is coming" took on new layers of meaning during these years. They were still a warning about the physical reality of winter, of course, a constant reminder of the harsh climate and the challenges it presented. But they also became a reminder to remain vigilant, to remember who they were and where they came from, to never become soft or complacent like the Southerners, who did not face the harsh realities that the North endured. It was a call to maintain their Northern identity, to resist the temptations of Southern luxury and decadence, to remain true to their traditions and their values. Every generation of Starks learned that lesson anew, passing down the wisdom of their ancestors, ensuring that the spirit of the North would endure. If there is a single point in the long history of House Stark that changed everything, that set in motion events whose consequences would echo for decades, it was the year of the false spring and the tragedy that followed, a turning point that would test the very foundations of the Stark family. This is where our tale becomes most painful, most personal, and where we see the honor and duty of House Stark tested to the breaking point, their values challenged by betrayal and loss. In the year 281 AC, a great tourney was held at Harrenhal, that cursed castle built by Harren the Black and melted by dragonfire, a place steeped in history and tragedy. It was attended by lords and ladies from across the Seven Kingdoms, a gathering of nobles that rivaled any in living memory, a spectacle of wealth and power. Among those in attendance were members of House Stark, their presence adding to the grandeur of the event. Lord Rickard Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, a man of stern countenance and unwavering integrity, was there with 3 of his 4 children. There was Brandon Stark, the eldest son and heir, a fierce and headstrong young man, known for his charisma and his skill at arms, already betrothed to Catelyn Tully, a union that would strengthen the ties between the North and the Riverlands. There was Eddard Stark, the second son called Ned, a quieter and more thoughtful young man who was fostered at the Eyrie under Lord Jon Arryn, where he had forged a close friendship with Robert Baratheon, learning the ways of chivalry and honor. And there was Lyanna Stark, the only daughter, a renowned beauty with a wild spirit, betrothed to Robert Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End, a powerful alliance that would unite the North and the Stormlands. The tourney was magnificent, a dazzling display of wealth and power, with knights from across the realm competing for glory, their lances shattering against shields, their skill on display for all to see. But its ending would be remembered not for the jousting or the feasting, but for a single moment, a seemingly insignificant event that, as Ned would later recall, was the moment when all the smiles died, the beginning of a chain of events that would plunge Westeros into chaos. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, heir to the Iron Throne, a figure of melancholy beauty and renowned skill, had won the tournament, defeating all challengers and claiming the victor's crown. Tradition held that he should crown his wife, Princess Alia Martell, as the Queen of Love and Beauty, acknowledging her as his chosen consort and honoring their marital bond. Instead, Rhaegar, in a move that shocked the entire court, rode past Elia and placed a crown of winter roses, the sigil of House Stark, in Lyanna Stark's lap, a gesture that was both breathtaking and deeply unsettling. The crowd fell silent, stunned by the audacity of the prince's actions. What did this? Robert Baratheon was enraged, seeing his betrothed honored by another man, his pride wounded and his jealousy ignited. Eddard Stark was deeply concerned, recognizing that nothing good could come from the heir to the throne publicly showing such favor to a woman betrothed to another, a dangerous game that threatened to unravel alliances and ignite conflict. Even King Aerys, already descending into the madness that would define his later years, took note of the incident and was displeased, his paranoia sensing a threat to his rule. What happened next remains a matter of debate and confusion, even centuries later, shrouded in rumor and speculation, the truth obscured by lies and half-truths. According to the official story, Prince Rhaegar abducted Lyanna Stark, spiriting her away against her will, a blatant act of aggression that shattered the fragile peace of the realm. She disappeared from wherever she was staying, vanishing without a trace, leaving behind a void of grief and uncertainty. When the news reached Brandon Stark, he was riding toward Riverrun for his wedding to Catelyn Tully, eager to begin his new life and forge a strong alliance between the North and the Riverlands. Brandon, hot-blooded and brave, a man of action and unwavering loyalty, immediately turned his horse south toward King's Landing, his heart filled with fury and a burning desire to avenge his sister's honor. With a group of young lords accompanying him, including Ethan Glover, Jeffrey Mallister, Kyle Royce, and Elbert Aaron, Brandon rode to the Red Keep and demanded that Rhaegar come out and face him, shouting that Rhaegar was a kidnapper and would die for his crimes, his words echoing through the courtyard, a challenge to the very authority of the Iron Throne. This was foolish beyond measure, a reckless act of defiance that would have terrible consequences. But Brandon was young and in love and furious, thinking only of his sister's honor, blinded by his rage. He did not consider the dangers, the power of the king, the political machinations that were at play. King Aerys, always paranoid and cruel, saw this not as a young man's rage, but as an act of rebellion, a challenge to his authority. He had Brandon and his companions arrested, imprisoning them in the dungeons of the Red Keep, their fate uncertain. Then he sent word to their fathers, including Rickard Stark, demanding they come to King's Landing to answer for their son's crimes, a summons that would lead to tragedy. Lord Rickard Stark came to King's Landing as honor demanded, his duty to his son outweighing his apprehension. He came believing he would stand trial, that he could defend his actions and his son's actions before the king and the assembled lords, confident in his ability to reason and to persuade. What he found instead was madness incarnate, a descent into cruelty and barbarism that would forever stain the reign of Aerys Targaryen. King Aerys, in his paranoia and cruelty, declared that the trial would be by combat, a mockery of justice. Lord Rickard would fight for his innocence and his champion would be fire, a twisted interpretation of the Targaryen sigil. They suspended Rickard from the rafters of the throne room in his armor, a spectacle of humiliation and cruelty, and lit a fire beneath him, a slow and agonizing death sentence. As Rickard roasted alive in his armor, the heat searing his flesh, Brandon was brought in with a leather cord around his neck, attached to a device just out of reach, a cruel and twisted game designed to inflict maximum pain. Brandon was told that if he could reach the sword nearby, he could cut his father down and save him from the flames, a false hope designed to torment him. Brandon, driven by desperation and a desperate desire to save his father, strangled himself trying to reach it, struggling and fighting as his father burned, his body contorting in agony until the life went out of him. A tragic end to a promising young man. Two Starks dead in the throne room, murdered by their own king in a mockery of justice before the eyes of the entire court, a horrifying spectacle that would forever be etched in the memory of those who witnessed it. But Aerys was not finished, his thirst for blood not yet quenched. He demanded that Jon Arryn, Lord of the Eyrie, send him the heads of his two wards, Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark, a demand that would push Jon Arryn to the brink and ignite the flames of rebellion. If Aerys had stopped after killing Rickard and Brandon, he might have gotten away with it, might have cowed the lords of Westeros into accepting his actions, however unjust they may have been. But by demanding the deaths of Robert and Eddard, he forced Jon Arryn to choose between his honor to his king and his honor to his wards, a choice that would determine the fate of the realm. Lord Arryn chose his wards, placing his loyalty to his friends above his fealty to his king. He called his banners and declared rebellion, openly defying the Mad King and igniting a war that would reshape Westeros forever. Thus began Robert's Rebellion, also called the War of the Usurper by those loyal to the Targaryens, a bloody and brutal conflict that would claim the lives of countless men and bring down a dynasty that had ruled for centuries. Eddard Stark, now Lord of Winterfell by the murder of his father and brother, his heart filled with grief and a burning desire for revenge, called the banners of the North, rallying his lords to his side, made the perilous journey from the Eyrie to the north, crossing the Mountains of the Moon and hiring a fisherman to take him across the Bight to White Harbor, risking his life to reach his ancestral home. The fisherman drowned in a storm, his small boat capsizing in the treacherous waters, but his daughter brought Ned to the Three Sisters, islands ruled by a local lord who had to decide whether to turn Ned over to the king for reward or let him continue north, a difficult choice with potentially deadly consequences. The lord chose to let Ned go, betting correctly that the rebellion would succeed, a gamble that would pay off handsomely. Ned reached Winterfell and called his lords, summoning the strength of the North to his side. The North rose in fury at the murder of its lord and his heir, its anger fueled by grief and a desire for justice. An army marched south, led by Ned, their faces grim, their hearts hardened by loss. They arrived with Hoster Tully's forces at the Battle of the Bells, where they saved Robert Baratheon from the forces of Lord Connington, turning the tide of the battle and securing a crucial victory for the rebels. To seal the alliance between the rebels, to unite their forces against the Targaryen dynasty, Eddard married Catelyn Tully, honoring his dead brother's betrothal and forging a powerful bond between the North and the Riverlands. Jon Arryn married Lysa Tully, further cementing the alliance and solidifying their commitment to the rebel cause. The war raged for close to a year, a bloody and brutal struggle that claimed the lives of countless men and left Westeros scarred and broken. Northern forces fought with distinction at multiple battles, proving their strength and their loyalty to the rebel cause, most notably at the Trident, where Robert Baratheon faced Prince Rhaegar in single combat, a clash of titans that would determine the fate of the realm. Robert killed him with his warhammer, smashing the Dragon Prince's ruby-encrusted breastplate and scattering the rubies into the river, a symbolic victory that shattered the Targaryen dream. With Rhaegar dead, the Targaryen cause was doomed, their hopes of victory crushed beneath the weight of Robert's warhammer. Lord Tywin Lannister, who had remained neutral throughout the war, carefully watching the tides of battle, suddenly declared for Robert, sensing the impending victory and seizing the opportunity to gain favor with the new king. Tywin raced to King's Landing, his intentions far from honorable. His men were allowed into the city on the pretense of defending it, but instead they sacked it, murdering, looting, and raping, unleashing a reign of terror upon the city's inhabitants, their actions driven by greed and a desire for revenge. When Eddard Stark arrived at King's Landing with the main body of the rebel army, he found Tywin's men had already taken the city, their brutality leaving a trail of death and destruction in their wake. He rode into the Red Keep and found King Aerys dead at the base of the Iron Throne, his throat slit, his blood pooling on the floor, a gruesome end to a reign of madness. Sitting on the throne itself, holding a bloody sword, was Sir Jaime Lannister of the Kingsguard, a young knight who had just killed the king he was sworn to protect, an act that would forever tarnish his reputation and earn him the moniker Kingslayer. The bodies of Princess Elia Martell and her children, Princess Rhaenys and Prince Aegon, had been brutally murdered by Sir Gregor Clegane and Sir Amory Lorch at Tywin's command, a horrific act of barbarism that would forever stain the Lannister name. The babies were wrapped in Lannister red cloaks and presented to Robert as trophies, a gesture that sickened Eddard to his core. He was horrified by the brutality and the injustice of it all, the senseless violence and the utter disregard for human life, a stark contrast to the ideals of honor and justice that he held so dear. This was not the honorable war he had envisioned, the righteous rebellion he had bled for. This was a descent into savagery, a grim spectacle of butchery and murder draped in the tattered banner of victory. It was dishonor, plain and simple, a betrayal of everything he held sacred. He clashed fiercely with Robert, their voices echoing in the halls of King's Landing about the slaughter of the Targaryen children. To Eddard, these deaths were not just unfortunate casualties of war, but a vile stain upon the rebellion's very cause, a blemish so deep it could never be cleansed. He saw it poisoning the very ideals they had fought to uphold. The once unbreakable bond of friendship between them was stretched to its breaking point, frayed by disagreement and disillusionment. Though ultimately the threads of their shared past held, the connection would be irrevocably altered, forever marked by the horror Ned had witnessed. But the shadows of tragedy had not yet finished their dance. There was one more sorrowful revelation waiting in the wings, one more heart about to be shattered. Lyanna Stark was not in King's Landing as he had hoped. She was far to the south, in Dorne, held within the ancient walls of a place called the Tower of Joy. Guarding her were three of the finest knights the Kingsguard had ever produced: Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning, his blade Dawn legendary for its keenness and beauty; Sir Oswell Went, a formidable warrior in his own right; and Lord Commander Sir Gerald Hightower, the White Bull, a man whose courage and skill were surpassed by none. Driven by a desperate hope and a gnawing fear, Eddard rode south with 6 companions, a grim company of loyal men, including his steadfast friend Howland Reed of Greywater Watch. Their journey was fraught with peril, the land scarred by war and rife with bandits, each mile traveled heavy with foreboding. They rode to find his sister, to rescue her from whatever fate had befallen her. What transpired at the Tower of Joy would become the stuff of whispered legends and shrouded mystery, a tale spun in hushed tones around crackling fires. 7 northern warriors faced 3 of the greatest knights in the realm, a clash of steel and wills that shook the very foundations of the ancient tower. When the dust settled, when the screams had faded into the Dornish wind, only Eddard and Howland Reed remained standing, battered and bruised, their victory bought with the blood of their comrades. All 3 Kingsguard knights lay dead, their white cloaks stained crimson, including the legendary Sir Arthur Dane, whom many considered the finest knight of his generation, his skill with Dawn unmatched. But even in victory, Eddard found no joy, no solace, only the crushing weight of sorrow. Lyanna Stark was dying, her lifeblood staining the bedsheets in a room that reeked of roses and grief. She was feverish, her body racked with pain, her eyes filled with a haunting fear, and as life ebbed away, she extracted a promise from her brother, a secret so profound that Eddard would never reveal it to another living soul. "Promise me, Ned," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. And Eddard, his heart breaking with each word, promised. Then she died, her breath escaping like a sigh, and the world grew a little darker. In the shadow of the Tower of Joy, Eddard built 8 cairns of stone in the harsh Dornish mountains, a monument to loss and sacrifice. One for his sister, a testament to her stolen life, and one for each of his 6 fallen companions, heroes who had given their lives for honor and duty. When Eddard returned to Winterfell, he carried with him more than just grief. He brought with him an infant boy, a babe wrapped in furs against the northern chill, whom he claimed as his bastard son, naming him Jon Snow. He would never speak of the boy's mother, not even to his wife Catelyn, though whispers followed him like shadows, some claiming she was a woman named Willa. The presence of this bastard in Winterfell, raised alongside his true-born children, became a source of constant pain and conflict for Catelyn, a wound that festered with resentment and mistrust. To her, Jon was a living reminder of Ned's infidelity, a stain on his honor that she could never truly understand or forgive. But the truth, the secret that Eddard Stark guarded fiercely for the rest of his days, was far more complex and dangerous than a simple act of infidelity. Jon Snow was not his son at all. Jon was the child of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, born in that desolate tower, the product of a passionate love affair or a brutal abduction, depending on whose version of the events you chose to believe. Eddard had promised his dying sister to protect the boy, knowing that if Robert ever learned that a male heir of Rhaegar lived, the child would be hunted down and killed without mercy, the Targaryen bloodline purged from the realm. So Eddard did the only thing he could do, the only thing that would ensure the boy's survival. He claimed Jon as his bastard, allowing his own honor to be stained, allowing his wife to resent him, shielding the boy from the king's wrath at any cost. He kept the promise he had made to Lyanna with her dying breath, a vow etched in blood and grief. Robert Baratheon, the victorious rebel, became king, founding a new dynasty built on blood and conquest. Eddard Stark returned to Winterfell as Warden of the North, a grim and silent figure, and retreated into his frozen domain. The scars of the rebellion never fully healed, the memories of loss and sacrifice haunting his waking hours. Brandon and Lyanna were dead, their lives cut short by the madness of a king and the chaos of war. They were buried in the crypts beneath Winterfell, where Ned commissioned statues to be carved in their likenesses, an act of love and remembrance that defied ancient tradition. Rickard Stark lay beside them, the father who had failed to protect his children. 3 Starks who should never have died, their absence a constant ache in Ned's heart. 3 lives cut short by the madness of a king, and the tragedy of events no one could have prevented or predicted. For 15 years after Robert's rebellion, Eddard Stark ruled the North in relative peace, a stern and just lord, respected and feared in equal measure. He was a good lord, just and fair, strict but not cruel, commanding respect and loyalty from his bannermen through his unwavering adherence to honor and duty. He was not a perfect man. He knew his own flaws and failings intimately, but he was a good man in a world where good men often finished last, or worse, dead. His story, and the intertwined stories of his children, would come to define House Stark's role in the tumultuous events that were about to unfold. Ned's marriage to Catelyn Tully had begun under difficult circumstances, a union forged in the aftermath of tragedy, as she was originally meant to marry his brother, Brandon. But from that awkward foundation, they had built something real and lasting, a bond of affection and respect that weathered many storms. Catelyn gave him 5 true-born children, Robb, the heir, born at Riverrun while Ned was still at war, a boy destined for greatness. Sansa, beautiful and proper, a lady in every sense of the word. Arya, wild and brave, a spirit untamed. Bran, curious and adventurous, always seeking knowledge. And Rickon, the youngest, still a small boy finding his place in the world. As our story reaches its crisis, Jon Snow was raised alongside his supposed half-siblings, though Catelyn could never truly accept him, her resentment a palpable presence in the halls of Winterfell. Jon and Robb became as close as true brothers, sharing secrets and dreams, but Jon always felt the sting of bastardy, knowing he could never inherit Winterfell, never be a true Stark, no matter how much Ned seemed to love him. Ned also extended a distant kindness to Theon Greyjoy, taken as a ward after the failed Greyjoy rebellion, a boy torn from his family and thrust into a foreign world. Though Theon always felt more like a hostage than a member of the family, a constant reminder of the Iron Islands' defeat, Ned taught his children the lessons he had learned through blood and tears, the values that defined House Stark, values etched in stone and passed down through generations. He taught them that honor matters, that duty comes before desire, that the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword, that the North remembers, and that winter is always coming. He took them to see executions, not out of cruelty, but so they would understand the weight of justice, the finality of death, and the consequences of their actions. He let them find the direwolf pups, one for each child, recognizing the omen, even if he didn't fully understand its meaning. He prepared them as best he could for a world that would prove far more dangerous and cruel than he could have ever imagined, a world where the old rules no longer applied. In the year 289 AC, Balon Greyjoy, Lord of the Iron Islands, declared independence from the Iron Throne and crowned himself king, reigniting the fires of rebellion. Robert Baratheon called his banners, and Ned led the northern forces south to crush the uprising, a grim reminder of the cost of defiance. The war was short and brutal, ending with the destruction of the Greyjoy fleet and the siege of Pike, the Greyjoy's ancestral seat. Balon surrendered, and as assurance of his future loyalty, his last surviving son, young Theon, was taken by Ned to Winterfell as a ward, a gesture of both mercy and control. This was the last time Ned saw Robert for 9 long years, the last time he left the North until the king came to Winterfell and changed everything, setting in motion a chain of events that would unravel the very fabric of Westeros. Those 9 years were good years for House Stark, a period of relative peace and prosperity in the harsh land of the North. The North prospered under Ned's just rule, its people content and secure. His children grew strong and healthy, their laughter echoing through the halls of Winterfell. Ned administered justice, settled disputes, collected taxes, and prepared for winter as his ancestors had done for 8,000 years, diligently fulfilling his duties as Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. He was content to remain in the North, far from the intrigues of the South, far from the treacherous politics and hidden dangers of King's Landing. He had no ambition beyond protecting his family and serving his people, content to live a life of quiet duty. But in the year 298 AC, word came that Jon Arryn, Hand of the King, had died, his death shrouded in mystery and suspicion. Ned received a letter from his wife's sister, Lysa Arryn, claiming that the Lannisters had murdered Jon, her words filled with paranoia and fear. And then came Robert Baratheon himself, riding north with half the court, a boisterous procession that disrupted the tranquility of Winterfell, to ask his old friend to leave his home and become the new Hand of the King. Ned did not want to go, every instinct screaming at him to refuse. Every fiber of his being told him that nothing good could come from entangling himself in the poisonous politics of the South, that King's Landing was a viper's nest where honor and integrity were luxuries few could afford. But Robert was his king, the man he had fought alongside, the friend he had sworn to protect, and when the king asks, a subject cannot easily refuse. Catelyn urged him to accept, seeing it as an honor and an opportunity to forge an alliance between their families by betrothing Sansa to Robert's eldest son, Prince Joffrey, a match that could secure the future of House Stark. Against his better judgment, Ned agreed, swayed by duty and the pleas of his wife. He rode south with his daughters, Sansa and Arya, leaving Robb to rule Winterfell in his absence, leaving Catelyn to advise Robb, leaving the north in what he believed were capable hands. He could not have known that he was riding to his death, that this decision would shatter his family, would plunge the realm into war, would begin a chain of events whose consequences would reshape the entire political landscape of Westeros, leaving a trail of blood and fire in its wake. King's Landing, Ned found himself surrounded by deceit and treachery, trapped in a nest of vipers where trust was a dangerous illusion. Queen Cersei Lannister, beautiful and ruthless, was nothing like the women of the North, her ambition and cunning as sharp as any blade. Her brother Jaime, the Kingslayer, wore his dishonor like a badge of pride, flaunting his defiance of the oaths he had sworn. Her other brother, Tyrion, the dwarf called the Imp, was far more clever and dangerous than his diminutive size suggested, his wit as sharp as Valyrian steel. Lord Peter Baelish, called Littlefinger, who had grown up with Catelyn and her sister, turned out to be a master manipulator, weaving webs of intrigue for his own advancement, playing all sides against each other. Lord Varys, the eunuch spymaster, played his own games with his own goals, his network of spies stretching across the realm, his true loyalties forever shrouded in mystery. Ned began to investigate the circumstances of Jon Arryn's death following the trail of breadcrumbs left behind, and discovered that Jon had been looking into the parentage of King Robert's children, a dangerous line of inquiry that had likely cost him his life. Following the same trail, Ned made a terrible discovery, a truth that threatened to shatter the very foundations of the kingdom. Prince Joffrey, Princess Myrcella, and Prince Tommen were not Robert's children at all, but the product of an incestuous relationship between Cersei and Jaime Lannister, their golden hair a damning testament to their illicit union. Every child with golden Lannister hair and not a single one with the black hair that was the dominant Baratheon trait, a glaring contradiction that exposed the Queen's deception. Before Ned could act on this knowledge, tragedy struck, escalating the simmering tensions into open war. Catelyn had come south after Tyrion Lannister was recognized on the road and taken him prisoner, believing he was responsible for an attempt on Bran's life, an accusation that fueled the flames of conflict. This rash decision ignited a war between Stark and Lannister, with Tywin Lannister invading the Riverlands in retaliation, his armies pillaging and burning their way across the countryside. Then Robert was mortally wounded in a hunting accident, almost certainly arranged by Cersei, his reign brought to an abrupt and bloody end. On his deathbed, Robert, in a moment of fleeting clarity, named Ned Protector of the Realm until his son Joffrey came of age, entrusting him with the stewardship of the kingdom. Ned, ever honorable, tried to do the right thing, even when it meant risking his own life. He approached Cersei privately, giving her a chance to flee with her children before he revealed the truth about Joffrey's parentage, offering her a chance to escape the consequences of her actions. This was an act of both mercy and foolishness, giving his enemy time to prepare, allowing her to consolidate her power and plot against him. When Robert died, and Ned tried to reveal the truth and place Robert's brother Stannis on the throne as the rightful heir, Cersei struck first, her treachery swift and decisive. The City Watch, which Ned thought he could trust, turned on him, their loyalty bought with Lannister gold. Littlefinger betrayed him, revealing his true colors as a master of deception. Ned was arrested for treason, his honor turned against him. In the throne room before the assembled court, young King Joffrey, as cruel and mad as his grandfather Aerys in his own way, demanded that Ned confess his treason, reveling in the humiliation of his captive. Ned, desperate to protect his daughters, knowing their lives hung in the balance, promised that if he confessed, his life would be spared, and he would be allowed to take the Black and join the Night's Watch, a fate far preferable to death. He confessed, called himself a traitor, and begged for mercy, swallowing his pride for the sake of his children. Joffrey promised mercy, his words dripping with false sincerity. Cersei and the entire court expected him to be merciful, that Ned would be sent to the wall, that this would end the conflict, a resolution that would preserve the peace, however fragile. But Joffrey, showing the sadistic streak that would define his reign, declared that mercy was for the weak, a sentiment that sent a chill through the room. He commanded Sir Ilan Payne to bring him Ned Stark's head, a gruesome spectacle to be performed in front of his daughter Sansa, in front of the assembled nobility of Westeros, on the steps of the great Sept of Baelor, a public display of power and cruelty. Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, Hand of the King, was forced to his knees, his life's journey brought to a brutal and senseless end. Sir Elin drew ice, Ned's own ancestral greatsword, a symbol of his authority and lineage, and with one swift stroke severed Ned's head from his shoulders, the blade gleaming in the sunlight. The Honorable Ned Stark was dead, executed for the crime of trying to do the right thing, murdered by the very system of justice and law he had always upheld. A tragic irony that underscored the corruption and decay at the heart of the realm. His death shocked the entire realm, sending ripples of disbelief and horror through every corner of Westeros, and lit the fires of war that would consume the land for years to come, unleashing a storm of chaos and destruction. News of Eddard Stark's execution reached Winterfell like a thunderbolt, shattering the fragile peace of the North and igniting a fury that had not been seen since Robert's rebellion. Robb Stark, who had been ruling Winterfell in his father's absence, was now the Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, burdened with a responsibility he was not yet prepared for. He was 17 years old, barely a man by any reckoning, but he had no choice except to grow up immediately, to shoulder the weight of leadership and vengeance. His father had been murdered, his sisters were hostages in King's Landing, and the North demanded justice. Robb called the banners, and the banners answered, the Lords of the North rallying to his cause. The Lords of the North had loved Ned Stark, had respected his honor and his justice, and they were willing to follow his son into war, to avenge his death and protect their homeland. The Great Umber, Lord Rickard Karstark, Roose Bolton of the Dreadfort, Mage Mormont of Bear Island, and dozens of other lords, great and small, rode to Winterfell with their men, their faces grim, their hearts filled with righteous anger. An army assembled, thousands strong, a force to be reckoned with, ready to march south and rescue Ned, not yet knowing that they came too late, that their hopes were already dashed. When word reached them that Ned was dead, that Joffrey had executed him, the fury of the North became something primal and unstoppable, a force of nature unleashed upon the realm. But the question remained, what were they fighting for? Some wanted simple revenge, to kill Lannisters and burn their lands and make them pay for what they had done, to inflict suffering upon those who had wronged them. Others saw this as an opportunity to break free from Southern rule once and for all, to reclaim their independence and forge their own destiny. Robb's mother, Catelyn Stark, had gone south to be with Ned, leaving Winterfell in Robb's care. When she was released after Ned's death, she joined Robb and his army as they marched south, her presence a source of comfort and counsel. But the Lords of the North were making their own plans, their desires fueled by years of resentment and a longing for self-determination. Led by the Great Umber, who had been the first to draw steel in Robb's defense and had lost 2 fingers to Robb's direwolf Grey Wind for his trouble, the Northern Lords declared that they would have no more Southern kings. They would have a king in the North, as in the old days, as before the dragons came, a ruler of their own blood and heritage. They acclaimed Robb as their king, their voices ringing with conviction, and one by one the lords knelt before him and swore their oaths of fealty, pledging their swords and their lives to his cause. King Robb Stark, the king in the North, the first to hold that title since Torrhen Stark bent the knee 3 centuries before, a momentous occasion that reshaped the political landscape of Westeros, was glorious and terrifying and doomed from the start, though none of them could see it then, blinded by hope and driven by vengeance. Robb was young, talented, and brave, a skilled commander despite his youth, and he won victory after victory, his military prowess surprising even his most ardent supporters. At the Battle of the Whispering Wood, he captured Jaime Lannister himself, the great knight and kingslayer, a strategic victory that sent shockwaves through the South. At the Battle of the Camps, he destroyed another Lannister army, further solidifying his reputation as a formidable leader. He earned the nickname the Young Wolf, and songs were written about his prowess in battle, his name whispered with awe and respect. The lords of the Riverlands, whose lands were being ravaged by the Lannisters, also declared for Robb, naming him King of the Trident as well as King in the North, forging an alliance that strengthened their cause. This alliance was sealed when Catelyn negotiated safe passage across the Twins, the strategic crossing of the Green Fork controlled by House Frey, a negotiation that would ultimately prove to be their undoing. Lord Walder Frey, a notoriously suspicious and vengeful man, agreed to support Robb, but only if Robb would marry one of his many daughters or granddaughters, binding their houses together through marriage. Robb agreed, seeing no other choice, recognizing the strategic importance of the Twins and the need for Frey's support. The Northern Army crossed the Twins to relieve the siege of River Run, their hopes buoyed by the promise of victory. For a time, everything seemed possible, the tide turning in their favor. Robb won battle after battle, outmaneuvering Lord Tywin Lannister himself, the most accomplished commander in the realm, a feat that cemented his legend. He freed Riverrun and pushed the Lannisters out of much of the Riverlands, liberating the region from their grip. His bannermen followed him with absolute loyalty, seeing in him the qualities of his father combined with a military genius that Ned had never possessed, a leader who could deliver them to victory. Even his direwolf, Grey Wind, fought beside him in battle, tearing out the throats of enemies and terrifying the Lannister forces, a fearsome symbol of the North's unwavering resolve. But war is not won by battles alone. Politics, alliances, and strategy matter as much as swords and courage. And in these areas, young Robb, honorable like his father, would make mistakes that would prove fatal, flaws in his armor that would ultimately lead to his downfall. The first mistake came when Robb fell in love while recovering from wounds taken in battle at the Crag, the seat of House Westerling, a minor house sworn to the Lannisters. Robb was tended to by Talisa Maegor, a healer from Volantis, a woman of intelligence and compassion. They fell in love, their connection forged in the crucible of war and in a moment of passion and grief, after learning that his younger brothers, Bran and Rickon, had supposedly been killed by Theon Greyjoy. Robb slept with Talisa. Bound by his honor, feeling he had wronged her, Robb married Talisa in secret, breaking his oath to marry a Frey, a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. This was a catastrophic error, a breach of faith that would unravel the carefully constructed alliances that sustained his cause. Lord Walder Frey, already a suspicious and vengeful man, withdrew his support from Robb's cause, his pride wounded, his ambitions thwarted. 4,000 soldiers, critical to Robb's plans, were no longer available to him, weakening his forces and leaving him vulnerable. The strategic advantage of the Twins was lost, and more importantly, Robb had shown that he could break his word, that his honor was not absolute, that he could be swayed by love or desire. This was seen as weakness by some of his own bannermen, undermining their confidence in his leadership. The second mistake came when Robb executed Rickard Karstark for murdering 2 Lannister prisoners who were distant cousins of Jaime and Cersei, a crime that violated the laws of war and threatened to destabilize his alliance. Lord Rickard had committed this crime in revenge for his sons who had been killed in battle, his grief blinding him to the consequences of his actions. But it was still murder, and Robb, following his father's principle that the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword, personally beheaded Rickard, upholding the law but sacrificing political expediency. This was just, but it was also politically disastrous. The Karstarks, one of the largest and most powerful houses that had declared for Robb, abandoned him and returned home, their loyalty shattered, their allegiance broken. Half his army melted away overnight, desperate to replace his losses and regain Frey's support. Robb agreed to a proposal from Lord Walder. Robb's uncle, Edmure Tully, would marry one of Walder's daughters at the Twins, a union that would ostensibly atone for Robb's broken oath, would bring the Freys back into the alliance and would allow Robb to continue his war, a solution that seemed reasonable on the surface but concealed a deadly trap. What Robb did not know was that Lord Walder Frey and Lord Roose Bolton, one of Robb's own bannermen, had secretly negotiated with Tywin Lannister, their ambition and greed outweighing any sense of loyalty or honor. They would betray Robb, murder him and his followers, and in exchange would receive titles, lands, and the protection of the Iron Throne, rewards that would elevate their houses and secure their future. Tywin, recognizing that he could not defeat Robb on the battlefield, chose to destroy him through treachery instead, exploiting his weaknesses and turning his own bannermen against him, a strategy that proved far more effective than any military campaign. And so Robb Stark, his pregnant wife Talisa, his mother Catelyn, and thousands of northern soldiers rode to the twins for what they believed would be a wedding and the renewal of their alliance with House Frey. Their hopes high, their guard lowered. Lord Walder welcomed them, gave them bread and salt as a sign of guest right, that sacred tradition of hospitality that promised safety to all who shared food under a host's roof, a tradition that was about to be violated in the most brutal and shocking way imaginable. The wedding took place, the vows exchanged, and the feast began, the hall filled with music, laughter, and the illusion of peace. Then the music changed, the merry tunes replaced by a somber melody, a chilling warning of what was to come. Musicians began to play the Rains of Castamere, the Lannister song about the destruction of House Rain, a chilling reminder of the consequences of defying the Iron Throne, a subtle message that foreshadowed the impending massacre. Catelyn saw Roose Bolton smirking, a cruel glint in his eyes, and noticed chainmail beneath his sleeve, a subtle detail that revealed the treachery unfolding around them. She realized the truth a heartbeat too late, her mind reeling in horror. She tried to warn Robb, but the doors were already closing, sealing their fate. The crossbowmen were already taking aim, their weapons trained on the unsuspecting guests. What followed became known as the Red Wedding, one of the most shocking and infamous violations of sacred law in Westerosi history, a massacre that would forever stain the name of Frey and Bolton. Talisa was stabbed repeatedly in the stomach, killing her and her unborn child before Robb's eyes, a horrific act of cruelty that shattered his heart and filled him with despair. Robb himself was shot with crossbow bolts, unable to defend himself or save his wife, his body riddled with wounds, his strength ebbing away. Outside in the camps, Bolton and Freymen turned on the northern soldiers, slaughtering them in their tents, drunk and unprepared for betrayal, their cries of shock and terror echoing through the night. Catelyn, in her grief and rage, seized Lord Walder's wife, a young girl, and threatened to kill her if they did not let Robb go, a desperate attempt to save her son's life. But Walder Frey cared nothing for his wife, his heart as cold and cruel as the northern winter, and Roose Bolton stepped forward and drove his sword into Robb's heart, ending his life with a single brutal thrust, saying words that would echo through history, words that symbolized the ruthlessness and treachery of the Lannisters. "The Lannisters send their regards," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Robb Stark died in his mother's arms, betrayed by men he had trusted, murdered along with his wife and child, his dreams and ambitions extinguished in a single bloody night, his bannermen slaughtered, his cause destroyed, his kingdom shattered. Catelyn, in her grief and rage, killed Walder's wife, a futile act of vengeance that did nothing to alleviate her pain, and then had her own throat cut by one of the Freys, her life ending in the same brutal and senseless manner as her son's. The Northern Army was destroyed, its strength broken, its spirit crushed. The king in the north was dead, his reign cut short by treachery and betrayal, his legacy forever tainted by the Red Wedding. The Freys desecrated Robb's body, cutting off his head and sewing on the head of his direwolf, Grey Wind, in its place, a grotesque mockery that underscored their cruelty and their contempt for the North, parading this abomination through the halls as a symbol of their victory, a chilling warning to all who would defy them. The young wolf had fallen, and with him fell the hopes of northern independence, the dreams of justice for Ned Stark, and the unity of House Stark itself. The Red Wedding destroyed the Stark army and killed the king in the north, but it did not destroy House Stark entirely. The surviving children, scattered across Westeros and beyond, endured their own trials and tribulations, their own journeys through darkness toward whatever light they might find. Their spirits tested, their resolve strengthened. Each followed their own path, transformed by their experiences, becoming harder, stronger, more dangerous than they had ever been, their destinies intertwined with the fate of Westeros. Sansa Stark, the eldest daughter, had been living as a hostage in King's Landing since her father's arrest, her innocence shattered, her dreams of romance replaced by the harsh reality of political intrigue. She had been betrothed to Joffrey, but was cast aside when he chose to marry Marjorie Tyrell instead, a political maneuver that further diminished her standing and left her vulnerable to abuse. The Lannisters forced her to marry Tyrion, the imp, in an attempt to claim Winterfell through her, a cruel and calculated move that turned her into a pawn in their Game of Thrones. Tyrion treated her with kindness, never consummating the marriage, his compassion a stark contrast to the brutality of those around him. But Sansa remained a prisoner in all but name, her life a constant struggle for survival. She was tormented by Joffrey before his death, used as a pawn by everyone around her, taught harsh lessons about the difference between the songs and stories she had loved as a girl and the brutal reality of power and politics, lessons that would shape her into a survivor. After Joffrey's death, Peter Baelish, who had been manipulating events from the shadows, saw an opportunity to exploit Sansa's situation and further his own ambitions. He smuggled Sansa out of King's Landing and took her to the Vale, where her aunt Lysa ruled as Lady of the Eyrie, hoping to find sanctuary in her protection. But the Vale offered no sanctuary, only a different kind of danger. Lysa, driven mad by jealousy and obsession with Littlefinger, tried to kill Sansa, her mind clouded by paranoia and fear. Littlefinger, ever the opportunist, pushed Lysa to her death through the Moon Door, eliminating a rival and consolidating his control over the Vale, his actions a testament to his ruthless ambition. Sansa found herself under Littlefinger's protection, a dangerous alliance that forced her to learn the art of deception and manipulation. Learning from one of the most dangerous players of the game how to survive, how to lie, how to manipulate, skills that would be essential to her survival. Eventually, Littlefinger arranged for Sansa to marry Ramsay Bolton, now legitimized and heir to the newly created Warden of the North, a marriage that would seal his control over the North through her claim to Winterfell. This marriage was perhaps the worst thing that ever happened to Sansa, a descent into unimaginable horror. Ramsay was a monster, sadistic and cruel beyond measure, who raped and tortured her systematically, breaking her spirit and leaving her scarred, both physically and emotionally. But even this hell tempered Sansa, forging her into a stronger, more resilient woman. Taught her that she could endure things she never imagined possible, that she had a strength within her that even Ramsay could not break. When she finally escaped Winterfell with Theon's help, jumping from the walls into the snowdrifts below, a desperate act of defiance, she was no longer the naive girl who had dreamed of knights and princes. She was a survivor, hardened by tragedy, her eyes open to the darkness of the world, ready to fight for her family and her home. She had become a survivor, a stark transformation from the naive girl who once dreamt of knights and princes. The harsh realities of the world had forged her anew, instilling within her the understanding that power was the ultimate shield, the only true protection against the cruelties she had witnessed. Kindness, she learned, was a vulnerability, a weakness exploited unless fortified by unwavering strength. This was the new Arya Stark. Arya Stark, the younger daughter of Ned Stark, had narrowly escaped the clutches of King's Landing before her father's unjust execution. Smuggled out of the city by Yoren of the Night's Watch, who was scouring the realm for recruits to defend the Wall, she embarked on a harrowing journey through the war-torn Riverlands. Years she spent wandering, a silent witness to the barbarity of conflict. She saw villages reduced to smoldering ruins, their inhabitants slaughtered without mercy, caught between the warring factions. Both her brother Robb's forces and the Lannister armies left trails of devastation in their wake, indifferent to the suffering of the small folk. For a time she traveled with the Brotherhood Without Banners, a band of outlaws seeking justice in a lawless land. Later she fell captive to the Hound, Sandor Clegane, a scarred and cynical warrior who saw her as a valuable ransom. He intended to return her to her family for a reward, but fate intervened. They arrived at the Twins, the seat of House Frey, only to witness the horrifying aftermath of the Red Wedding, the treacherous massacre that decimated House Stark. Any hope of returning home was extinguished. With no safe haven left in Westeros, Arya made a daring decision. She secured passage on a ship bound for Braavos, a city across the narrow sea, a place of mystery and intrigue. There she sought out the House of Black and White, the temple of the many-faced god, and requested to be trained as a faceless man, one of the legendary assassins of Braavos. The training was brutal, designed to strip away her identity, to mold her into someone devoid of self. She was forced to relinquish her past, to become no one, to forget that she was Arya Stark of Winterfell. But Arya, despite the relentless pressure, could never fully sever the ties that bound her to her family and her home. secretly kept her sword needle hidden away, a tangible connection to John and Winterfell. She also kept her list of names, a litany of those who had wronged her family and deserved to pay the ultimate price. This list served as both a reminder of her past and a fuel for her future. Eventually, Arya left the House of Black and White, taking with her the deadly skills she had acquired but refusing to completely surrender her identity. She returned to Westeros, not as a lady or a child, but as something entirely new, something dangerous, a trained killer who could change her face, move unseen, and strike without warning. The world thought her lost, but she was very much alive, honed into a weapon of vengeance. She was Arya Stark, and she was coming home. Brandon Stark, known as Bran, suffered a fate that forever altered the course of his life. He was crippled when Jaime Lannister pushed him from a tower window after Bran inadvertently witnessed Jaime and Cersei in an incestuous embrace. Confined to his bed or carried by Hodor, the gentle, simple-minded stable boy, Bran was initially viewed with pity. Yet beneath his physical limitations lay latent gifts, powers that others could only dream of. He was a warg, capable of entering the minds of animals, most notably his direwolf Summer. Through Summer's eyes, he could roam the forests and feel the thrill of the hunt, escaping the confines of his broken body. He also experienced strange dreams, visions of the past and possible futures, a phenomenon known as greensight. When Winterfell fell to Theon Greyjoy, Bran and his younger brother Rickon were forced to flee their ancestral home. They were aided by Osha, a fierce wildling woman, and by Mira and Jojen Reed, the children of Howland Reed, a loyal bannerman who had fought alongside Ned at the Tower of Joy. Jojen, gifted with green sight of his own, had dreamed of Bran and knew that the young Stark held a crucial destiny. Together they journeyed north, beyond the Wall, seeking the three-eyed raven, a mysterious figure from Bran's visions. The journey was arduous and fraught with peril, leading them through the haunted forests, past ancient weirwood trees, and into lands where the dead walked. Jin eventually sacrificed himself to protect Bran, but his sacrifice allowed them to reach their destination, a hidden cave where an ancient being, the last Greenseer, awaited. This being, who revealed himself as the three-eyed raven, had once been a Targaryen bastard named Brynden Rivers, also known as Bloodraven. He had lived for centuries, entwined with the roots of the weirwood trees, observing the ebb and flow of time. He took Bran as his apprentice, teaching him to harness his powers, to see through the eyes of the weirwoods, to witness the past, and to understand the great conflict between the living and the dead that loomed on the horizon. In time, Bran would become the three-eyed raven himself, shedding his mortal identity and taking on the mantle of living memory, a repository of all that had been and much of what would be. He was no longer just Brandon Stark. He was something more and something less than human, a bridge between the world of men and older stranger powers, a silent observer of the grand tapestry of existence. Rickon Stark, the youngest of the Stark children, was too young to fully grasp the magnitude of the events that unfolded as his family crumbled around him. He fled Winterfell with Bran, but they were eventually separated, a decision made to increase their chances of survival. Rickon was entrusted to Osha's care and sent to seek shelter with the Umbers, one of House Stark's most loyal bannermen. He lived in hiding for years, waiting for the day when he might return home and reclaim his birthright. That day would eventually come, but it would end in tragedy. Ramsay Bolton, the sadistic bastard of House Bolton, used Rickon as bait to lure Jon Snow into battle. In a cruel and calculated act, Ramsay murdered the boy before Jon's eyes, piercing him with an arrow to the back, a final act of depravity in a life defined by it. And then there was Jon Snow, the bastard son of Ned Stark, the one who was not really a Stark at all, or so everyone believed. He embarked on his own arduous journey, one that would lead him to discover his true identity and his ultimate destiny. He joined the Night's Watch before the outbreak of war, taking the solemn vows to father no children, hold no lands, and wear no crowns. He served at Castle Black, ranging beyond the Wall, facing the harsh realities of the frozen north, fighting wildlings and encountering far more sinister creatures lurking in the shadows. He rose through the ranks with remarkable speed, earning the respect of his brothers and the admiration of his superiors. He eventually became Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, the youngest in the history of the Order, a position that demanded difficult decisions and required him to negotiate with wildlings in an attempt to prepare for the looming threats that few others believed in. Jon's commitment to protecting the realm, even from those deemed enemies, ultimately led to his demise. He was murdered by his own men for his controversial decision to allow the wildlings through the wall, stabbed repeatedly by brothers who believed he was betraying the Watch. But death was not the end for Jon Snow. He was miraculously brought back to life through the magic of the Red Priestess Melisandre, a follower of the Lord of Light. Having died, his watch had ended, his vows were fulfilled. Jon Snow was now free to leave the Wall, free to return to the world of the living, and free to reclaim his heritage, even though he did not yet know the full truth of his parentage. By the year 300 AC, House Stark appeared to be shattered beyond repair. The Lord and Lady of Winterfell were dead, brutally murdered at the Red Wedding. The daughters were missing, presumed dead or lost forever. The castle of Winterfell had been seized by the Boltons, who ruled the North through treachery and terror, ruthlessly eliminating any who opposed them and consolidating their power with the backing of the Iron Throne. But the wolves were not dead. They were scattered, yes, changed and hardened by suffering and loss, but undeniably alive. And they were coming home. Sansa Stark, once a naive girl dreaming of courtly life, had endured unimaginable horrors and emerged as a cunning and resilient woman. She escaped from Winterfell with the help of Theon Greyjoy, the same Theon who had once betrayed the Starks by seizing their home. Now, broken by Ramsay's torture and consumed by guilt, Theon sought redemption by aiding Sansa in her escape. By fortune or fate, they encountered Jon Snow and the wildlings he had brought south of the Wall. The reunion between Jon and Sansa was deeply emotional, a testament to the enduring bonds of family. They were the first Starks to reunite since the family had been torn apart years before. Together, they resolved to retake Winterfell from the Boltons and reclaim their ancestral home. But they faced a daunting challenge. They had almost no army. The Northern Lords, weary from years of war and terrorized by Bolton cruelty, were hesitant to declare for House Stark again. Too many had lost sons and brothers at the Red Wedding. Too many feared the Boltons' wrath. Jon and Sansa traveled from castle to castle seeking support, but their pleas were met with reluctance and fear. The wildlings would fight for Jon, but their numbers were limited to a few thousand. Some houses, like the Mormonts of Bear Island, pledged their support despite having few soldiers to spare. Young Lyanna Mormont, a girl of 10 who ruled her house with remarkable courage and wisdom, gave Jon and Sansa 62 men, every fighter Bear Island could spare. Her words resonated throughout the North, becoming a rallying cry for those who still held on to hope. House Mormont remembers, the North remembers. We know no king but the king in the North, whose name is Stark. But it would not be enough. Ramsay Bolton commanded thousands of soldiers, battle-hardened men who had helped him defeat Stannis Baratheon's army. Sansa, however, had one more card to play. She sent a raven to Peter Baelish in the Vale seeking his assistance. Baelish, who professed his love for Sansa and certainly desired to possess her and use her for his own advancement, convinced the young Lord Robin Arryn to send the Knights of the Vale north to aid House Stark. The North then at Ramsay, but Jon, the Stark, the North. She reminded the lords that Jon had called the banners when no other Stark could, that he had retaken Winterfell, that he was Ned Stark's son, bastard or not. Other lord and so Jon's or so the white no throne. This not the final how they after Sansa Daenerys she was but she they were this just meanwhile she had a she was but ultimately he was when he revealed to Jon the truth about his parentage, that he was not Ned Stark's bastard but the legitimate son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, named Aegon Targaryen. Jon's entire understanding of himself was shattered. He was not a Snow, he was a Targaryen. He was in fact the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, with a stronger claim than Daenerys herself. This revelation would have profound and far-reaching consequences, reshaping the political landscape of Westeros. But before those consequences could fully unfold, the army of the dead arrived. The Night King, the first and greatest of the White Walkers, led his forces south, his icy gaze fixed on the destruction of all life. He had killed one of Daenerys's dragons, Viserion, and raised it as a white, using its ice-blue fire to destroy the wall at Eastwatch and march his army into the north. The living gathered at Winterfell for what would be called the Great War or the Long Night. The castle's defenses were meticulously prepared. Trenches were dug and filled with kindling ready to be ignited to create a fiery barrier. Dragonglass weapons, the only substance other than Valyrian steel that could kill White Walkers, were forged and distributed among the defenders. Warriors from across Westeros came to fight. Northmen and wildlings, knights from the Vale, Daenerys's Unsullied and Dothraki. Two dragons fought for the living, unleashing torrents of fire upon the advancing horde. The greatest army ever assembled, prepared to face the dead, knowing that the fate of the world hung in the balance. The Battle of Winterfell was brutal beyond description, a nightmarish clash of ice and fire, life and death. The Dothraki charged into the darkness, their fiery swords briefly illuminating the horrors before they were extinguished like candles in a hurricane. The dead came in relentless waves, endless and unstoppable, climbing over each other to reach the living, their icy touch bringing instant death. Dragons fought in the sky, fire battling ice in a desperate struggle for dominance. The defenders were driven back, overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of the dead, dying by the hundreds, their courage and skill no match for the relentless onslaught. The Night King came for Bran, knowing that killing the three-eyed raven would erase the memory of the world, destroying the last link to the past and any hope for the future. He walked through the Godswood, the sacred heart of Winterfell, while his whites massacred the defenders who stood between him and his target. Theon Greyjoy, seeking final redemption for his past betrayals, died protecting Bran, sacrificing himself to buy precious seconds. The Night King approached Bran, raised his icy sword to strike the fatal blow, and then out of the shadows, Arya Stark appeared as if from nowhere, a wraith-like figure propelled by years of training and an unquenchable thirst for vengeance. Leaping through the air with a Valyrian steel dagger clutched in her hand, she aimed for the Night King's heart. He caught her by the throat, his icy grip threatening to crush the life out of her, but Arya, with a final surge of strength and agility, dropped the dagger and caught it with her other hand, driving it into his chest with all her might. The Night King shattered into countless shards of ice, his reign of terror brought to a sudden and unexpected end. Every white he had raised, every White Walker he had created shattered with him, their unnatural existence extinguished in an instant. The army of the dead fell like puppets whose strings had been cut, their threat neutralized, their advance halted. The Great War was over, won not by armies or dragons, but by a young woman who had been trained to be no one and chose instead to be Arya Stark, the protector of her family and the savior of the realm. But victory came at a terrible cost. Thousands had died, their sacrifices etched into the collective memory of the living. Winterfell was a charnel house, filled with the stench of death and the sorrow of loss. The joy of survival was tempered by grief for all those who had perished in the defense of the living, and as the dust settled and the bodies were burned, the conflicts among the living, which had been set aside to face the greater threat, now resurfaced with renewed intensity. Daenerys, having played a crucial role in saving the world, turned her attention to conquering it, her ambition undeterred by the devastation she had witnessed. She marched south to take King's Landing from Cersei Lannister, her claim to the Iron Throne burning brighter than ever. Jon Snow, conflicted by his duty to his queen and his growing love for her by his own claim to the throne and his desire to avoid it, marched with her, his heart heavy with foreboding. When Daenerys, driven by grief and rage after the death of another dragon, Rhaegal, and her closest friend Missandei, unleashed her fury upon King's Landing, burning the city to the ground and massacring hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians, Jon was forced to make the most agonizing decision of his life. He could no longer ignore the darkness that had consumed her, the tyrannical impulse that threatened to plunge the world into a new era of oppression. He killed Daenerys, stabbing her in the throne room of the Red Keep, ending her reign of fire and preventing her from spreading her destruction to the rest of the world. It was murder, an act of betrayal, but it was also necessary, a tragic act of sacrifice to save the realm from a tyrant. Was an echo of Jaime Lannister killing Aerys Targaryen years before, an honorable man doing a dishonorable thing to prevent further carnage. Jon fully expected to die for his crime, to pay the ultimate price for his act of regicide, but he was protected by the Stark name, by his allies, and by the complex political realities of the moment. The Unsullied, fiercely loyal to Daenerys, demanded his execution, But the remaining lords of Westeros, weary of war and bloodshed, sought a more nuanced solution. In the aftermath of the devastating war, the remaining lords and ladies of Westeros gathered to decide the future of the realm. Tyrion Lannister, imprisoned and awaiting execution, offered a radical proposal suggesting that the age of hereditary monarchy should end and that the lords should choose their king, ushering in a new era of representative governance. And in one of the most unexpected turns of fate, Bran Stark, who had no desire to rule and possessed no ambition in the conventional sense, was chosen as Bran the Broken, King of the Six Kingdoms. He was seen as a figure of wisdom and impartiality, a living repository of knowledge who could guide Westeros into a more just and equitable future. Six kingdoms, not seven, because Sansa Stark, ever the pragmatist, demanded independence for the North. After everything they had endured, after all the sacrifices they had made, the North would be free again, its people able to determine their own destiny without interference from the Iron Throne. The other lords and ladies, exhausted by years of conflict and perhaps recognizing that the North had earned its freedom through hardship and resilience, agreed to Sansa's demand. Sansa was crowned queen in the North, the first woman to rule the kingdom in her own right since the ancient age of heroes. Jon Snow, for killing Daenerys, was sentenced to rejoin the Night's Watch, to go north of the Wall and never return to the south. It was exile disguised as mercy, a way to appease the Unsullied while acknowledging Jon's heroic past. He left Winterfell one last time, bidding farewell to his sisters, to Sansa, who would rule the north with wisdom and strength, and to Arya, who was preparing to sail west into the unknown seas, seeking what lay beyond the edge of the map, driven by her insatiable curiosity and thirst for adventure. Bran, going south to rule the Six Kingdoms, could not join them, separated by duty and by his transformation into something beyond human, a being more connected to the ancient past than to the present world. And so the Starks scattered once again, but this time not in defeat, but in triumph. They had endured everything the world could throw at them, weathering betrayals, war, exile, and the literal apocalypse. They had lost loved ones along the way, but the house endured, its spirit unbroken. Bran ruled the south, guiding Westeros into a new era of peace and prosperity. Sansa ruled the north, ensuring its independence and safeguarding its people. Arya sailed to new adventures, charting unknown waters and discovering new lands. Jon lived beyond the Wall with the free folk, finally finding a place where he belonged among people who valued his courage and respected his independence. House Stark's history, 8,000 years in the making, had led to this strange and unexpected conclusion, a testament to the enduring power of family, honor, and resilience. Not destroyed, not defeated, but transformed, the Starks were scattered across the world, holding power in ways their ancestors could never have imagined. And so we reach the end of our journey through the long, bitter, and glorious history of House Stark. From Brandon the Builder raising the wall in the dawn of history to Sansa Stark crowned as queen in the North in the modern age, we've traced the path of one family across 8 millennia. We've seen them rise from minor kings to rulers of the entire North, watched them endure conquest and submission, witness their near destruction and their miraculous survival. What can we take away from this epic tale? Perhaps it's that honor, while it may cost everything, is ultimately worth the price. Eddard Stark died because of his unwavering commitment to honor, but his children survived and triumphed because they carried that same honor in their hearts, even when they had to bend it to survive in a cruel and unforgiving world. Perhaps it's that family endures when nothing else does. The Starks were scattered and broken, but they always found their way back to each other, and that loyalty, that love, sustained them through the darkest of times. Or perhaps the lesson is simpler and starker, like the land they come from. Winter always comes, darkness always falls, death is always waiting, but spring comes too, the sun rises, life continues. And if you can endure the winter, if you can survive the darkness, if you can hold on through the longest night, then you might just live to see the dawn. The words of House Stark were never a boast or a threat. They were a warning, yes, but also a promise, a testament to their unwavering resolve. Winter is coming, they declared, and we will be ready. Winter came and they were ready. Winter came and went, and House Stark endured, their legacy forever etched into the annals of Westeros.